All right, I think we have a quorum, so I think we can get started now. Welcome to today's webinar titled Growing Climate Resilience, Regenerative Agriculture at University Demonstration Campuses. I was reminded by the team that Energy Week in 2023 was closed out with an agriculture event, so it seems fitting to open this year's Energy Week with an event on the same topic. My name is Thabo Lene. I'm the Managing Director of the recently launched Sustainable Agriculture Fund at the Kleinman Center for Energy Policy at the University of Pennsylvania, and I'll be moderating today's discussions. Our speakers today are joining us from all the way across the world in Kisumu, Kenya, as well as right here in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. So I'll start with Dean Andrew Hoffman, who is the Dean of the University of Pennsylvania School of Veterinary Medicine, sorry, mouthful on a Monday morning, and an acclaimed researcher, clinician, teacher, and mentor. He previously served as a director of the Regenerative Medicine Laboratory and professor of large animal internal medicine at Tufts University. Welcome, Professor Dean Hoffman. Vice Chancellor Hazel Miseda Mumbo is a multidisciplinary visionary leader with strategic competencies to manage complex assignments and 26 years experience in various sectors and positions. Currently, she is the Vice Chancellor of Great Lakes University of Kisumu in Kenya. Welcome, Vice Chancellor Miseda. Next, we have Professor Thomas Parsons. Great. Next, we have Professor Thomas Parsons, who is a Marie A. Moore Professor of Animal Welfare and Ethics at the New Bolton Center, University of Pennsylvania. Director. He is also Professor of Swine Production Medicine at the University of Pennsylvania School of Veterinary Medicine. Welcome, Professor Parsons. And last but not least, we have Professor Thomas Rewe, who is currently the Deputy Vice Chancellor of Academic Affairs and Research at Great Lakes University of Kisumu. He's also an Associate Professor at Pwani University and a member of the National Scientific and Ethics Committee at Nakosti, Kenya. Welcome, Prof. Rewe. Thank you to all our speakers for being here. So welcome to our panelists. Thank you all for joining us in the audience. And thank you for being with us early on a Monday morning for those in the US and at the end of your day for those across the world in Kenya or anywhere else. I'll start us off with some key questions as sort of a housekeeping thing. And then we'll open up to Q&A towards the end of the discussion from the audience. We'll be ending promptly at 10 a.m. today because people need to get on with their days. So please have your questions ready and feel free to put them in the chat and our team will queue them up. So as an introduction to the session, agriculture remains one of the most climate sensitive and yet impactful activities on the planet today. This means that while conventional agriculture practices contribute to climate change through greenhouse gas emissions from animals, fertilizers, land use, the other side of this is that farming operations are particularly vulnerable to climate impacts. So droughts, extreme heat, flooding, a lot of the climate impacts that we are seeing today. With this backdrop in mind, there's a growing call for adaptive, sustainable solutions that prioritize environmental stewardship without compromising food security. So the importance of this topic is clearly, as it relates to climate policy, is self-evident. So it makes it fitting within this Energy Week framework in this forum. But before we dive into the substance of the discussion and the links between energy policy and regenerative agriculture, the audience may still be wondering why these two institutions in particular are having this discussion. So both the University of Pennsylvania Vet School and Great Lakes University Kisumu are committed to participatory applied research in the ag sector. So we'll kick off the conversation with a bit of background. Dean Hoffman, maybe we could start with you. When people think of the vet school, they immediately think of animals, but maybe broader agriculture issues aren't necessarily what come to mind. Could you talk more about why you're prioritizing this?
Thank you, Thabo. I appreciate that introduction. Welcome, everybody. Yeah, I think as alluded to in the title of the session, first of all, let's just talk about the importance of veterinary medicine and an academic institution and demonstration farms to this topic. There's a really important shift, I think, that has gone on recently from traditional sort of linear top-down type of research in agriculture involving the scientist in their laboratory environment where knowledge is transferred linearly to the extension agent and to the farmer as a passive consumer of knowledge and technology resources. And that system has really not yielded in recent days the best outcome, and that is because we need the farmers' knowledge and background and sociocultural factors introduced into this innovation system. So the future innovation is sort of a flexible participatory research in agriculture, including in agriculture, agroecology, and in agriculture related to climate change. So whereby the knowledge and resources are flowing iteratively back and forth between the stakeholders. And in generating sort of a modern innovation system, and that is producing and yielding on our demonstration farm, as well as many, many others, a wealth of feedback from farmers as agents of change. And I want to also point out, as a veterinary school, that the veterinarian is really critically inserted in this participatory research environment, more so than ever, because we are a trusted practitioner. We're on the farms all the time. If anybody's on the farm outside of the farmer's family all the time, it's the veterinarians. And as change agents, knowledgeable enough to translate some of this information. I think the School of Veterinary Medicine at Penn Vet at Penn has 2 wholly owned and operated commercial demonstration farms. And I just wanted to make one point before I get out of everybody's way, that we have one swine farm, which is, produces organic pork, and the other is a commercial dairy farm, which is a 1980s style greenhouse style dairy with 200 cows, a commercial operation. And these operations are consistent with our regional small size farm. The average farm size in our region in Pennsylvania is 94 cows, which is much smaller than some of the big dairy areas of the nation and the world. And 99% of our farms are family owned. So we are trying to engage farmers, not trying to change the model of farming. We're adapting to new technologies in the region, to our regional agricultural models and systems, and consider the social cultural factors, which are really critical to our success. So I won't go into the details of our farms yet. I'll yield to the other speakers.
Thank you, Dean Hoffman. I think this is a really interesting point that you talk about, sort of the farmers as the agents of change is kind of an approach that I think resonates quite deeply across the pond, with the folks at Great Lakes University. So maybe that's a good point to hand over to Vice Chancellor Miseda to talk a little bit about similar concepts and linkages that are going on at Great Lakes University. You are muted, Vice Chancellor.
Thank you very much, Thabo. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, everyone. This way it is already afternoon towards 4 o'clock, towards 5. So I'm excited to be here. And thank you. This is quite a timely conversation, because at the Great Lakes University, we are basically health science oriented. We are working very closely with the communities within the region. And our essence is that communities are trapped between ill health and poverty. And unless we have food security, then we will not be able to break the vicious circle. And one of the key things within the university is about regenerative agriculture. And we have been in this platform that we have been the knowledge management of some of the international NGOs in regards to how to improve the soil within the community, so that we can at least maximize in reproduction of food, so that we can have food security within the region. Besides that, we have a school of agribusiness that is purely looking at agriculture and how to do business with what are from the farms, which is the essence of, or rather the backbone of the economy of Africa, really. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chancellor Miseda. That gives us a little bit of insight into what's going on at Great Lakes University. I think it sounds a lot like the communities, be they farmers, the climate scientists, academia. There's an integral link there between what's going on at Great Lakes University as well as Penn Vet within this space. So this gives us a good basis to delve into the topic. Since we find ourselves having this discussion, during Energy Week, where some might not be completely familiar with the concept of regenerative agriculture, maybe let's start with foundational definition or definitions of the topic. So Prof. Rewe, if hopefully you're still with us, I know that you're at the airport and your internet connection might be a little bit unstable, but would you like to kick us off with, at the most basic level, what is regenerative agriculture?
Thank you, Tebo, and thank you, the panelists and all the participants from all over the world who have joined us. I'm Rewe, and from Great Lakes University of Kisumu. I just appreciate so much what the Vice Chancellor has said concerning how the Great Lakes University of Kisumu is engaging in this. Now, my basic definition of regenerative agriculture is anchored on the word regenerative, because everybody knows what agriculture is. It's culturing crops and animals to produce food. But the regenerative is the issue, because agriculture has a big, what you call elephant in the room, and is accused of being a climate nuisance and all this. Why? Because there's a lot of depletion of the soil. Sometimes it affects the air around us. Sometimes it affects the biodiversity because of the chemicals we use. And sometimes it even creates waste. So regenerative simply means whatever you're using, whether it's nutrients in the soil, organic matter, whether it's the microbes, whether it's the water, the soil moisture, whether it's the biodiversity, can we use it sustainably by making sure that we are replenishing what we are using? So that is the essence of that regenerative agriculture. So that's not a defeatist, a depletive kind of operation, but restoration of the resources that are being used to produce food. That would be my basic definition.
Thank you, Prof. Thank you, Prof. Rewe. I think from what I've heard and read, that there seem to be a lot of definitions that sometimes float around in this space. And thank you for the illuminating definition that you shared around specifically the word regenerative. Professor Parsons, would you share a little bit of what you sort of think the thread that connects some of these different definitions and tie into maybe what Professor Rewe has shared?
Sure. And I'll just echo everyone's thank yous, both to the organizers and to the panelists and to the participants here. It's great to see the engagement. I think, Taba, when I think about this notion of regenerative agriculture, I think one of the things that's unique about it and maybe sometimes challenging to people is that you alluded to kind of the variation in the definitions. But I think what emerges from that is really the notion at the core of regenerative agriculture is this idea that all agricultural solutions are local. And so what they need to do in Kenya may be different than what we need to do in Pennsylvania, but there's these underlying principles that Professor Rewe really nicely laid out that reinforce what drives us to make the specific decisions that we're going to make here to find regenerative solutions. And so, how we maybe define and act upon it here in Pennsylvania may look very different than somewhere else. But it's this notion of recognizing that agriculture really needs to be in concert with the environment around itself. And there's so many local variables there that need to be acknowledged. And I think that sometimes leads to frustration for people because they really want to see this kind of turnkey solution, if you will, and they want to see one answer. And it turns out that I think the beauty of regenerative agriculture is that it really it kind of revels in the shades of gray, right? There's not a black and white answer here.
Yeah. And I think that's a good point, Professor Parsons, about the sort of local nature of this in concert with the environment. And to go back to what Dean Hoffman shared about sort of matching what is sort of going on within the local community. Dean Hoffman, you shared something about the farm as being trusted change agents, I think is the way that you put it. Do you think that this sort of helps and, address some of the challenges and, creating a more of a widespread adoption of some of these practices by farm managers? Does it make them more receptive in a sense? How does that sort of help further the conversation?
How veterinarians may act as change agents or demonstration farms or both? Okay,
Both,
so
absolutely, yes.
I'll address both. I think, one of the challenges for regenerative agriculture is, in some ways, I look at it as a dream. And the reality is that every farmer, as Professor Railway and Parsons pointed out, have to contend with their regional and their local environments and their farming operations. And so making that transition to the dream of regenerative agriculture, where we are really improving soil health, sequestering carbon, maximizing animal health, and servicing providing a viable economic option for our farming communities, building communities, and food security. And sovereignty. These are big goals. And the reality is that farming is full of challenges. So the way I see it is that demonstration farms, and in our case, veterinarians that are involved in demonstration farms, can do a couple things. One is that they can de-risk the entire process of thinking through, testing, and implementing transition forms of agriculture. The average farmer that wants to transition from non-organics, for example, or non-regenerative practices to those more modern practices has several hurdles that we will also face as demonstration farms, but we have opportunities to de-risk that option. So let me give you some examples. Farmers, for example, particularly small and mid-sized farmers, have high upfront costs for any new project. That is something we can get funded. A farmer would have challenges in getting that funded from local sources or the USDA. A steady workforce is one of the biggest challenges in rural environments and in transition farms. We have those challenges too. We have competing workforces to get our workers and farm managers and so forth. And with that, housing for those individuals. That's something we can do as a demonstration farm that farmers have challenges with. The seasonality and the uniformity and consistency of crops and seeds and so forth, that's something we're all going to contend with equally. We can de-risk that somewhat because we're not as financially reliant on the outcome for our family's livelihood as a demonstration farm. The economies of scale. This is one of the biggest challenges for any farm. The small farmers have a niche and a distributing channel locally in their communities. The large industrial scale farmers have a distribution channel, a market, and a value chain. And the mid-sized farmers are left out. They don't get the funding, the commodity funding, they don't get the support, and they're trying to scale up. So scale up is a real challenge, and demonstration farms can de-risk some of the aspects of developing new practices around regenerative agriculture without that risk. And then again, the carrying of year-to-year debt and long delays and impact, that's something that demonstration farms can absorb that farmers cannot. So we work to de-risk the whole process of transitioning traditional style, industrial scale, high inputs, which we're talking about in contrast to regenerative agriculture, inputs of synthetic fertilizers, pesticides, soil erosion, industrial scale productions. We can develop this new model, but that transition is something that we can de-risk in the demonstration farm environment. The veterinarian's role, of course, is as somebody that is on the farms all the time, and also I should add the extension agents that are visiting the farms on a regular basis, the paraprofessionals that are visiting the farm on a regular basis, have to work as a team to socialize and adapt these newer ideas and have those conversations and learn from the farmers in terms of how these things are operating. Things as simple as low-till or no-till, mixed cover crops, that we plant over the winter or between cropland, between crops, and silvopasture, riparian buffers. We need to understand how those are working for the farmers, and there have to be people on the farm on a regular basis So demonstration farms that have change agents out on the farm are really, really critical for making the transitions that these farms need to do, for testing hypotheses, and for de-risking that process. I would say one other thing, that demonstration farms, emblematic of this call, can also link transnationally. And that's something that farmers don't have an easy time doing, except in maybe large corporations, but transnationally, we can start working together and learning from each other on these demonstration farms.
Thank you, Dean Hoffman. Extremely enlightening, and also a lot of key insights that I don't think many of us think about, this de-risking of the process, as well as sort of the embedding of the change agents to sort of socialize some of these ideas, I think is fundamental. Maybe I'll sort of switch to what you sort of ended on, this idea of transnational links and how we might have cross learnings from each other. Maybe Prof. Rewe and VC Miseda, you can talk a little bit about, you know, some of the commonalities that you're finding between what Dean Hoffman shared.
I'll go first because naturally Professor Rewe is an expert in this area. But from what he said and the transformational activities, what I see that is really very common between us and the demonstration farm, maybe in the open, is reduced costs. Reduced costs in the sense that when you have a demonstration farm, then it is the farmers that will come the farmers will come to learn from it, and you will not have disparities of what individual farmers having to do their own thing. It is also easy to manage, and when we are doing research, it is easy to collect data, and data will be at least verified and uniform. And we can be able to actually generate quite a lot of literature and information that can support the processes of improving agriculture within the region. I'll hand it over to Rewe because that is his forte. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Vice Chancellor. That is correct. And Dean Hoffman alluded to two sensitive things that I would like to agree that they affect also our regenerative farming ecosystem here. The issue of the transition being costly, that requires some initial funding to jumpstart the transition, and the labor issue. One of the things we found out in our interaction with regenerative agriculture is that it's labor intensive. Yeah, with the modern practices of agriculture, which have mechanized and use of pesticides and the use of these synthetic fertilizers, there is an extent to which they found a balance in how to utilize labor. But some of the what we're calling regenerative agricultural practices, which have to involve some locally produced organic fertilizers, some of which sometimes are not even packaged, requiring a little bit of labor to apply in the smallholder systems that we are working in. So if that is a commonality in our response, then demonstration farms becomes a solution, because a university is an institution, and as Professor Miseda correctly said, the controls within a university, and Dean Hoffman alluded to it also, that the workers there do not necessarily depend on the demonstration farm for their livelihoods, but it's basically a tool through which we can drive education and use it as an extension agent for our smallholder farmers network. So the cost element is also solved by the fact that the university can get grants. So I agree with that. Now, one thing that probably, I don't know if it happens in the US, and it affects so much the regenerative agriculture ecosystem here, is what we're calling the output. Is it an economic output? Can the farm compete economically with a synthetic farm, for example? And that has become quite a challenge to, because it's the game changer. If you can prove that it can produce food, that we have proven it can produce food. So recently, with our work in the REMS project, we are also trying to prove that is also economical. But that becomes quite a grinding, because you'll end up seeing situations where regenerative agriculture is more expensive for obvious reasons to sustain. So as an adoption principle to the smallholder farmer, it becomes a little bit challenging if it is going to be costly and the revenue not catching up with what we call the standard conventional farming. But now we have these other super benefits that have to be included in what we are calling collateral benefits, the things to do with the climate mitigation, the things to do with the restoration of soil health. They are soft, they are benefits, but somehow the farmers respond quickly to economics. So we are trying to see whether policy can aid the fact that these other public good items that come out of regenerative agriculture can also be pegged into to increase the value of regenerative competitiveness of regenerative agriculture. Now, the demonstration farm principle solves this problem in a way because, as Professor Hazel alluded, we are able to take data in a controlled environment if we are in charge in a demonstration unit within a learning environment. That one is what we call the on station. But we also have demonstration farms outside the university within a farmer field school. We call them farmer field schools. It's an approach of training smallholder farmers where they come together as a group, and then one central farm is actually an extension farm of the university, and then they all come and learn how to, and that farm is more or less semi-funded to the extent where it's not so expensive to run it. So those are the advantages of demonstration farms. They become a tool for education and also for cost management. And I hope as we move forward, policy will come in to help regenerative agriculture become competitive to the extent where it becomes the norm rather than the exception. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor Ariwe. I think that was a very elaborate, very helpful response in sort of creating the links to the two things. For the sake of the audience, I'll just clarify the Realms project that Prof. Ariwe mentioned is regenerative agriculture practices for livelihoods and markets, and we'll share that in the notes for the webinar, the summary notes afterwards. But before I'll sort of open to the floor to the panelists to respond if there are any responses to Prof. Ariwe. But one question I did want to tack on to, because you started alluding to the policy space, is that, policymakers, their biggest challenge is balancing what you sort of termed as sort of the soft benefits. So these long-term societal gains, if you will, with pain that is borne by certain communities. A lot of times the farming communities is what we're looking at. So we can look at recent protests and debates happening around the world, for example. So is there a role for academia and the institution to play within influencing this policy landscape? And what might that be, if there is? And I'll open this one to the floor.
To anyone? Yeah, let me begin because that is close to our heart as a Great Lakes University of Kisumu. As we speak, the Netherlands Development Organization, which is the partner we're working with in this Realms project, the SNV, one of the partners that we've come together in this space is the group we are calling Society for Agribusiness Advisors in Kenya, SOCA. They are basically an advocacy arm. So what university does is knowledge management. And then now that evidence created from the university of the competitiveness of regenerative agriculture is made into sort of policy briefs. And these policy briefs now are driven by the advocacy group we have in the team, the Society for Crop Agribusiness Advisors, to push it now to what we call local parliaments. I don't know how the other governments are set up, but in Kenya we have the county system, and each county has sort of an agricultural policy, and now the governor and the parliamentary situation in those counties need to be updated using those what we are calling policy briefs. They are easy to understand because they are not like a journal paper. They pull out a lot of the technical terms from the evidence created in the university into some basic package, a very short brief that highlights the benefits and also argues the costs and the benefits in terms of revenue of regenerative agriculture. So that we have done. As we speak now, we have developed 5 compatible policies for the 5 counties we are working in. That is Kakamega, Nakuru, Kericho, Uasin Gishu, and Bungoma. Those are counties in Kenya. We are hoping that in that kind of arrangement, when the policies are implemented, there will be more or less not just subsidies, but an open space that is competitive. Like now, if I just give an example, the policy requires that the recommendations governors should give for the fertilizers farmers can get are basically synthetic. We are now pushing that inclusion into some of the fertilizers should include the organic fertilizers that have been locally made as part of the recommendations they can give. Just one example of some policy interventions we are saying. Well, another one is when they are recommending pesticides to be used in the farms for a particular farming season, they could also deploy the fact that there are also biopesticides, not necessarily the synthetic pesticides that, of course, are associated with many ills and diseases. So those are kind of the spaces we are working in right now. Thank you, Thabo.
Thank you, Professor Rowe. Maybe I'll open up to Professor Parsons and Dean Hoffman if you have any responses on that.
Go ahead, Andy, if you want to start.
Okay, well, I'll just mention, I think Professor Rowe makes a very good point about academic institutions are really driving knowledge and knowledge management. And it's very important if we are to be effective and engaged in policy development that we're strong and that we strongly convey the data and information that's coming out of those institutions. And I'll give you some examples of our center that Professor Parsons directs in terms of the types of knowledge that we're generating that has reached everything from the Department of Agriculture to our legislators in local communities to our federal Congress men and women to the USDA and other stakeholders in industry and so forth. 7 areas of policy influence that come from knowledge, the generation of new knowledge. One, in relation to this discussion, the mitigation of enteric methane production from dairy and beef cattle. We specialize in dairy cattle, and we have a program that is specifically studying interventions, early life interventions and adult interventions such as supplements to really markedly reduce methane production from cattle. 2, upcycling of food waste from wholesale distributors to feed as dry matter to our dairy cattle to spare land needed for crop production, and importantly, reducing organic matter that would otherwise be deposited in landfills. Landfills are very inefficient at decaying organic matter. They produce massive amounts of methane. If you can feed those same things to dairy cattle, it spares the land needed to feed the same amount of food to those cattle as croplands, and it reduces the organic waste to landfills. Again, very much aligned with policy development in those areas. Welfare-friendly crating, of which Professor Parsons is a pioneer in swine, and I'll let him discuss that and why that's very important and very relevant to policies such as Prop 12 that came up recently in terms of new benchmarks in housing and swine. Another area, reducing antimicrobial use. We have faculty that are studying antimicrobial use for feeding of livestock as well as companion animals. But it's very important to address this issue at the policy level. We've recently, in the last decades, reduced prophylactic use of antimicrobials globally, but we haven't moved forward in prevention use and stewardship on that line. And so we continue to generate new knowledge and advocate for reduction in antimicrobial use. Very important that we continue to generate knowledge and manage the knowledge around disease surveillance. And so we have GIS mapping surveillance of infectious diseases in poultry and swine. Why is that important? When we're developing policies and allocating resources towards the agricultural industry, it's really critical that these surveillance, these preparedness or readiness mechanisms are available to the agricultural industry, and that the demonstration farm and the faculty involved are connected with our farmers directly in real time as to disease problems that come up. And that influences the allocation of resources. Profit teams, looking at the most economically viable pathways towards husbandry and decisions on nutrition and economic resources on the farm. So teams that go out and maximize the economic viability of farms. They are making observations on their farms about financial risk, about milk prices, about mental health, about a lot of things that go into making a farm sustainable and economically viable that they're communicating to us and to legislators and policymakers. And last but not least, agroecological projects such as the project also, again, Professor Parsons has led in riparian buffers and silvopasture environments on our demonstration farms, which again will influence the policy. And I would say a major point at the University of Pennsylvania has been the COP negotiations. And I'm very proud to be part of an institution where we have people in the Kleinman Energy Center and others that are at the negotiation table every year at COP. And they are influenced by the type of knowledge that's being generated on our demonstration farms and at least understanding what the issues are. And we work to try to do the best we can in our research communities at our university to communicate those findings so that they're useful and viable pathways for policymakers. So just wanted to give some tangible examples. I really believe that demonstration farms will need to address many of these issues: enteric, non-enteric methane, upcycling, animal welfare and societal trends, antimicrobial use, disease surveillance, profit and economic viability, and agroecology as a holistic environment, because they're very much related and interrelated. And when developing policy, one policy could influence all of those simultaneously. So it's very important that we have an understanding of multiple areas together. And that's why I think demonstration farms are influential on policy.
Great. Thank you, Dean Hoffman. I think that sort of touches on a lot of the key issues that we were going to go into. And so you've skipped ahead a little bit and also helped us with sort of some of the questions. As sort of a lead on to that point you make about requiring sort of a holistic approach to this and bringing in students. I'll dig a little bit into the Q&A since that chat has started coming up. Can we speak a little bit about the education potential of these campuses? I think, it's very clear for the people in the vet school and potentially people studying agriculture and climate policy, how they might engage in these demonstration campuses. What are the possibilities here for engaging more multidisciplinary teams and students across campus?
Well, I think,
go ahead.
Jabo, I can jump in here and just really want to congratulate everybody on the richness of the discussion. And that's really what takes us to this holistic view. And I think that's one of the things we're really excited about here at Penn is the number of different schools across the university that are engaging in agriculture. And I think we see New Bolton Center as this is a 700-acre campus out here. As Andy mentioned, we have multiple farms, including cropping operations that support those farms, those animal farms. And so we really have the opportunity for a circular system here. And we really are excited about the possibility of engaging in as many different disciplines across the university to look at this, at really these complex issues of where agriculture and the natural world intersect. And we see New Bolton Center as being this living laboratory. And so I think Andy's point is really spot on about the holistic nature of it, because I often like to think about this as this agriculture is this really complicated fabric, right? And you've got all these interwoven threads in there. And if you pull on one thread, it's pretty hard not to affect another thread, right? And so I think we get ourselves in a lot of trouble often. We get focused on one thread and we're not paying attention to the effects of how it's impacting the rest of the larger system. And then people wonder why maybe they don't get the intended response they want because they probably oversimplified the system. And so we just really look forward to being able to use New Bolton Center as that kind of place where we can really revel in the complexities of these issues. And certainly welcome, we're already engaging students. Obviously veterinary students are heavily engaged here. We've been working closely with the School of Design on the agroforestry project that Andy alluded to, as well as having students, undergraduates from some of the environmental science groups out here as well. And we really just want to continue to build out on those kind of educational collaborations.
Fantastic. Professor Parsons, I'll take that as an invitation to all the audience members to, somehow engage and visit the New Bolton campus. And so we'll share details about how that can happen in the notes. But maybe we'll pivot for a second to one of the other questions in the Q&A. Could the panelists discuss their perspectives regarding the viability of biofuels and/or agrivoltaics as potential solutions to the energy climate dilemma? So maybe for this one, maybe Prof. Rewe, since you have talked a little bit about biofuels and sort of the circular bioenergy system that you are working to create at Great Lakes University.
Thank you so much. That's a valid question. It's timely. What happened, and I like what Professor Parson, I believe, has just said about the holistic nature of their center and the multidisciplinary approach in solving some of the things. What happened is that regenerative agriculture suddenly became an opportunity. An opportunity because, as you heard Dean Hoffman say about the upcycling and about the huge amount of organic waste. Previously, in our conventional agriculture, some of those things were left in the landfills and we were busy producing food. It was about maximization of production. Now we want to optimize the system. How do you do that? Then the circular agriculture. So there are some byproducts that have come out of circularity in agriculture, and some of them are what are being alluded to by the question. Like this technology that has come in between production of crops and the waste that comes out of cattle. If you have an integrated system, the cattle produce manure, and there's a lot of organic waste coming out of the crop production. The technology of biodigesters. This is an engineering issue. So there's another another discipline coming in. Biodigesters, biodigesting organic matter, organic waste to produce biogas. That becomes an energy issue because biogas now can do the heating and they can do the some of those lighting, some of the things that we have an example where a farm, an agro-industrial farm, has built a huge biodigester that is able to actually produce enough biogas that is being converted to electricity and is going into the grid, meaning all the organic waste has been recycled. I know there are some agricultural outputs that actually have gone into the biofuels industry, and this becomes a sustainability issue with regenerative agriculture because it allows that anything that was considered waste before finds a place where it is actually providing utility. And in that way, regenerative agriculture becomes a nexus for agriculture and energy. And that is the way we are going. And we are seeing that that space is becoming wider and wider even as we move forward.
Thank you, Professor. I'll give Dean Andy Hoffman and Professor Parsons a chance to respond to that maybe in the closing remarks. Just in the interest of getting through some of the other questions, the next one in the chat is if we expand on what Dr. Parsons stated about local variables, how will culture and attitudes regarding farm animals impact regenerative agriculture? So what we view here in Pennsylvania may differ from what farmers view in Kenya or other areas. Does regenerative agriculture need to be cumulative in order to be effective? And I think this question is really cumulative in the culture and attitudes sense. And correct me if I'm wrong, Suzanne, if I'm misunderstanding or misinterpreting your question. Professor Parsons, I think this one was directed towards.
Yeah, thank you. So no, I mean, I think in terms of really defining cumulative, I think what's important again is that the success of regenerative agriculture will be that it embraces whatever the local and local social norms and needs are. And so I think Andy alluded to, particularly to this notion of animal welfare, and any regenerative or sustainable system, agricultural system, has to be socially acceptable. And so I think that's the challenge here as we go forward. We can help define through our data what are effective systems, and then it essentially has to pass through some kind of social filter to understand whether that's going to be acceptable. And those social filters are probably going to be local, right? And the expectation is the needs and cultural expectations here in Pennsylvania may be very well different than what's happening in Kenya. And I think the exciting part is, though, I think by being able to communicate, we can get new ideas and get better understanding of how to negotiate the best system going forward. But I do think we have to see really what is going to be the expectation of the society where you're trying to make an impact.
Thank you, Professor Parsons. Going to the next question in the chat, how does veterinary science fit into the role of climate change from a production perspective? So, for example, while one can argue that cultivating chicken eggs in an efficient and sustainable manner will reduce emissions, it does not address greater issues in regenerative agriculture, which seems to be more of an environmental soil agri-sciences problem. So I'll open the floor to any of the panelists who would like to take on this question.
I can start. I think it's an excellent question, and I think it gets to the heart of the matter that regenerative agriculture, again, is a dream, and it's a mosaic of ideas. The idea of having chickens that, for example, that are feeding on a variety of products from croplands in a farm, for example, vineyard products in a region, a valley, and growing up a unique terroir, let's say, of poultry, is a fantastic contribution to regenerative agriculture, because it's a form of upcycling. And you think of farms as an energy cycle, from carbon dioxide to plants to herbivores and fauna, megafauna, to all the way through to the production of food and fertilizer. And I think those types of ideas, every single one of those ideas that replaces the forms of agriculture that are destructive to our soils and to our environment, are viable. So your comment, I think, is the question, is an excellent question. And again, it's all solutions are on the table. And I think the idea of, backyard or small commercial flocks, which are well accepted around the country and across Europe and across Africa, where poultry are really a critical nutritional source, it is a very good question, and the role that that's going to play. Now, as I pointed out earlier, I just remind everybody that there are holistic issues associated with every choice that are made in agriculture. And in the case of poultry, some of the questions are scale, those are, land use, and then, of course, infectious diseases, which are dealing with a high path avian influenza right now, which is a global epizootic. So there are lots of challenges to those types of models, but I think of every solution that counters environmental fragmentation and destruction as being a viable solution. So I think poultry and I'm including multiple types of poultry, not only the ones that lay eggs, but ducks and turkeys and so forth, in those models, in combinations with other diversified types of agricultural practices, are very viable. I think that we need to develop more of that model around the world, that in some parts of the world have actually provided designations of geographic regions and types of farming practices and skill sets that we don't do in the United States, for example. The designated regions in France, for example, that designate certain types of farming practices, and not so much protect those practices. But I will say in closing here that those are interesting and viable regenerative forms of agriculture. And when they're done across larger regions, they contribute substantially to the regeneration of soils and the protection of our environment. So interesting is the word I wanted to emphasize, that we want young farmers. The average farmer in the United States, 57.5 years old, over a third are over 65. Where are these farmers going to come from that are going to do regenerative farming? It's really critical to think about what the practices are that farmers are going to be stimulated and retained into. We want to attract and retain people into farming. They have to be interesting practices, and regenerative farming is an interesting practice.
I think the one thing I would go ahead and just add there quickly is I think if we agree there's a role for animal agriculture going forward, when we look at regenerative agriculture, one of the tenets there is integrating animals into the cropping systems, this notion of a circular system, right? And I think at some level, that's really the hard part. And so maybe why you see the focus on so much on kind of cropping and soil, because that's been the easy part to do. But I think the work that really remains in front of us, and that's what us as a veterinary school are most interested in, is then understanding how do we put the animals into these regenerative agriculture systems.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. Well said, Dean Hoffman and Professor Parsons. I think, in our last 8 minutes in closing, I think there are some really great questions that have come up. Any of the ones that we did not address, we will in the resulting blog post from this. But closing remarks here, I think, Dean Hoffman, you put out a rallying cry there to attract and retain young farmers. One of the biggest things that's going around in the news cycle is that number of farms is diminishing, number of people going into the farming sector seems to sort of be on a decline in some ways, in some places. And so how do we sort of engage as the university demonstration campuses? What is the call to the audience here? How can they get involved? How can they start to find out more about this? And then more importantly, what media are you sort of streaming and listening to right now that might actually influence and stimulate some more insights about this that we can share with the audience? And I'll allow that closing remarks from each of the speakers. Maybe we can start with Vice Chancellor Miseda and then go around Dean Hoffman, Professor Parsons, and Professor Rewe.
Thank you so much. That's a timely question. Our statement, Thabo, especially at the time that we are actually closing the undergraduate agribusiness school, because most students do not think that agriculture is really in terms of a career. So what we are doing is we've attracted so many by getting, we've got
Vice Chancellor Miseda, we might be losing you. Maybe if you switch your video, we might have better chances with audio.
And like S plus the
Oh dear.
Hello.
Yes.
Is that better?
Yes, it's better without video, Vice Chancellor. Can you hear us?
Okay.
Your connection seems to have dropped, unfortunately.
Yes. Yeah. So with these other
I
think we may have lost connection.
We may have, yes. Professor
Rewe,
we can
I can hear you. I can hear you.
Vice Chancellor, can you hear us? I mean, try speaking now, maybe.
Yes, I can hear you.
Your connection may have gone down. We may have to follow up with your remarks in the blog post in the summary, given that we have 5 minutes left. We can try and come back to you towards the end, if that's okay. Okay, Professor Rewe, maybe you might be able to share some thoughts on that.
Yeah, the young
Hello,
people.
can you hear me?
Yes, we can, ma'am.
Oh, you can hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, what I was saying is that we've attracted students, masters and PhD students with the grants that we have so that they can be part of a system. We hope that they can be able to take up agribusiness because there's funding and appreciate what regenerative agriculture is all about. We hope that the more funding we can get, the better for us. But ideally, we should also think of scientific conferences that we may be able to disseminate the importance of regenerative agriculture and show how it influences the food security in the country. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chancellor.
Yeah, I'll just be quick so that I can donate my minute. It's just to say that we change the way we portray agriculture. Most of the photo shoots that we do in agriculture are for old farmers with tattered clothes and so forth. It's so unattractive for the young learners. They think of bank jobs, engineering, because the way we portray engineers and bankers with suits and everything. So farming can also be portrayed, disseminated in an attractive way for young people to believe that it's also an economic venture. So that's one thing we are looking at. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Wewe. On to you, Dean Hoffman and Professor Parsons, to close us out.
Okay, I'll just thank you so much. I mean, this has been incredibly interesting. I'll just say that from the veterinarian and the veterinary school perspective, that we connect to climate change in particular, and this issues of regenerative agriculture as a solution in 3 areas. One is health, animal health, human health, biodiversity, and the agriculture and food systems, those 3 areas. So the most efficient way to convey what the issues are and to get individuals interested in those areas is to make that connection, which we've done through a position statement that makes those connections. And I think what's important is that we start to make it clear that the veterinary profession is very, very much impacted by and also can impact those 3 areas. So we have individuals within biodiversity, agriculture, and food and health that are more interested in one or the other. Some are interested in all 3 and combining all 3. But I think the profession is more and more, particularly the younger generation that are entering our profession, are very, very passionate about this issue. And I would also say that our PhD scientists, our scientists that are at our school, I am heartwarmed by the fact that the younger faculty that are entering into our faculty positions and our institutions are very passionate about climate change and climate action. And so getting their collaboration has been a joy and of great interest. They want to educate, they want to learn, and they want to participate in research, and they want to participate in their communities as well as their community of their institution. So it's it's about communicating the connections and developing those relationships and collaborations.
Fantastic. Professor Parsons, would you like to close us out in the
Well,
last?
I get the last word here. So I
Yes.
just think what I want to do, expand a little bit on Andy's points and talk maybe about some of the vehicles and areas of contact that we have to kind of advance these ideas. And so certainly we're out there trying to support existing farmers and help them make transitions. I think we see demonstration farms like we talked about as the opportunity to help kind of entice or encourage new farmers to enter into this area. Andy talked about kind of how we're touching the veterinary community and veterinary students, but I think the other 2 groups of students that we're very, very interested in, that it's important that they have a better understanding about where agriculture is going, is both college and high school students. So we have now several high school student groups that come and spend time with us, get some hands-on experience. So to me, it's nothing more important than kids when they're 14, 15, or 16 are starting to learn where their food comes from. And then finally, I think the really rare and exciting opportunity we have here at Penn is to engage our college students. And I think when I look at the problems we've been discussing today, I think these are generational problems, right? These are issues that will probably be some of the most important to mankind in the next century. And so it's really important that we have the best and the brightest students engaged. And I think, to me, that's what I'm really excited about New Bolton Center as this living laboratory, is creating that space where we can, make farming a little more exciting, and maybe competitive with some of these other professions that Professor Woodway had referred to, and try to engage the Penn students as well. And then I think long-term, we really look forward to finding ways to build bridges between the two institutions and being able to share students and educational opportunities.
Fantastic. A great note to end on. I know we're over time, so I'll just, with that said, I'll say thank you to all of today's speakers and to the audience. We sincerely appreciate your participation on a Monday morning or afternoon, whichever one it is. And we encourage you to continue engaging with the Energy Week events happening throughout the week at the University of Pennsylvania. Refer to the link in your confirmation emails for details. Again, thank you for your participation. Thank you to the speakers. This was an extremely rich and enlightening dialogue. Have a wonderful week.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
everybody. See
Look
you.
forward to seeing you again. Thank you.
Take care.
Thank
Bye.
you.